Welcome to The Way the World Works, where the trusted team behind the Tuttle Twins books tackles current events, hot topics, and fun ideas to help your family find clarity in a world full of confusion.
Hi, Katie.
Hey, Brittany.
So, on another episode, or a couple of other episodes, Connor had touched briefly on what we call positive rights and negative rights, but we never had like a full episode explaining what that is. So, I thought we could do that today. So, I want to
Cool.
dive into this topic a little bit more because I think when we hear positive, we think good, right? Like that's what comes to my mind first.
Right.
When you hear negative, obviously you think like, oh, bad. But that's not what that means in this instance. So, I want to talk about that a little bit today. So, we have I guess there are two different beliefs in what rights mean to people when we come to talk about like constitutional rights or what the government should do. And when we talk about positive rights, we're talking about this belief that the government should give you something, some good, some service, or certain treatment, even, and that that's their primary role. When we talk about negative rights, that means that the government is limited and restricted towards what it can do to a person. And
Mhm.
that might sound confusing, but that's okay because the whole point of this episode is we're going to dive into some examples of this. So I'm going to start with negative rights. So negative rights are basically think of our Bill of Rights, right? The Bill of Rights is something that basically says what the government cannot do, right? They cannot take away our free speech. So I'm trying to think of a modern day instance of this. I mean, there's so many. Well, campuses, college campuses,
Mhm.
there's a lot of people, a lot of repressed speech. In fact, there's a great organization called FIRE. And FIRE's entire purpose is to make sure that colleges, actually, I think they do more than just colleges now, but it used to just be colleges, to make sure that colleges are respecting free speech, which so many of them don't. And the main reason is most colleges are funded by the government. And if you are
Mhm.
funded in any way by the government, then you have to abide by the Constitution. It's part of the 14th Amendment. And people forget. So like Harvard is actually a private school
Mhm.
because they take money through financial aid. They're technically not a private, like they are, but they still have to follow constitutional things. So that's one instance of what the government, like a negative right, like they can't take away your speech.
I think
Can you think of
we've
another one?
I was just gonna say, I mean, on the speech one, I was thinking, we see that on the internet. We especially saw it during COVID where it was like you couldn't even say certain words because it was like not allowed. That's weird,
Yeah,
right?
and we learned later from Mark Zuckerberg did an interview on Joe Rogan where we found out later that the FBI compelled him to do that,
Right. So
which was really interesting.
that's like even worse because it's the government specifically targeting your ability to say certain words, which is such a clear violation.
Such a clear violation. And I'm trying to think of some other ones. Right to bear arms, right? That says think about what words does almost every amendment in the Bill of Rights start out with, Katie? Or what
Uh,
like opening phrase?
I
I
don't
could say
know. Sorry.
I put you on the
Okay.
spot. Government shall not.
Okay,
Government
Shauna,
shall
yeah.
not is like that is like the beginning of everything. And that kind of tells you right there that negative rights, the government can't do this, right? It's telling them what they cannot do to people. They cannot take away your right to privacy. They cannot take away your right to property.
Mhm.
But these are things like whenever I think of rights, that is where my mind automatically goes. And maybe
Yeah,
that's because, I have spent so long studying the Constitution and things like that. I don't know. Is that where your mind goes to?
it does, and I think a lot of it actually does come down to me at least, like property rights, right? So it's like anything, if you view your body as your property and your mind as your property and the things that you own as your property, that covers a lot of negative rights, like your ability to just live your life without being, limited in the choices that you make that don't harm or affect anyone else. I think a lot of those negative rights kind of fall into that category. Like I can speak, I can protect myself, I can be private, like I can have the things that I buy can be mine and no one can take them from me. I can pursue my health in the way that I want to. These are things that are um, very personal and they belong to us. They're inherent to us. And we don't need permission from anyone else to be able to pursue or protect these things.
And they all, at the end of the day, protect the individual. It is an individual right.
Hmm.
And if you believe in limited government, which I believe you and I both do, then you believe that the government's only job is really to protect your rights from being violated, from them included, right?
Mhm.
And so that
Right.
that is to me what a right is. But there is another version of rights that some people believe are the true meaning of rights, and that is positive rights. Do you know, without looking at anything, Katie, do you know what a positive right is?
Um, I don't know that I
It
could
always
give the
confused me. Yeah,
actual
no, it always
definition,
confused
but
me.
it's
So don't worry.
yeah, but I but I think of it as, things that it's almost things that people want to be given. Like, it's my right to have, like, we hear people say, like, oh, I have a right to education. Okay, well, you do. You have a right to pursue education, but that doesn't mean that you have a right to someone's time that they spent in college to become a professor, and then the job that they got, they don't have to give you their knowledge for free, or have you can't compel someone else to give you your education. So I think it's something that where maybe people have their hand out and they're saying, well, I want this that isn't inherently mine, but I want someone to give it to me or provide it to me.
And that's you're exactly right, and it's a whole, like, other meaning of a right, right? Like, it's so different to me than what we talked about with the negative rights. So, I think I always think of, like, the Antifa or during, like, the protests in Seattle where they started their own their own little colony, but it was all about, like, everyone deserves a home, so there shouldn't be the only reason we have homelessness is because it's a
We
human
have
right, and you'll
landlords.
notice exactly, it'll always come I've noticed they say human right a lot. So,
Mhm,
where we
mhm.
believe, like, something different, they'll say, it's a human right, everybody should have access to food, why do we have to pay for food? Everyone has a human right to healthcare, why should I have to pay for the doctor and all these things? Everyone or I have the right to the fruits of my neighbor's labor, right? I have the right to some of your
Mhm.
paycheck, Katie, because for whatever reason, I can't it's hard for me to grasp what reason there
I
could
know.
be, but there are like, that's what they think, and it's such an
Well,
interesting Oh, go on, please.
oh, I was just gonna say, I think you're kind of nailing it in that almost all of them, or honestly, all of them that I can think of, require compelling someone else to give you something that
Mhm.
isn't yours, that you didn't earn or you didn't work for. Like, it's like saying, well, I exist, and because I exist, you have to give me this thing. Either you, the government, meaning I want you to collect tax money from people who worked and give it to me because I don't want to work, or I want you to force this person who started this business to provide services to give me those services without me having to pay for them. Like, it's almost an act of violence. I mean, I, okay, I say violence,
Well,
aggression,
but
maybe.
forces yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, that's
yeah,
what but
force.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's force almost every time. I'm trying to think of examples of what people view as positive, or what positive rights that don't require forcing or compelling.
I think that's a key maybe a key definition because I think there isn't, right? I think it is all force. And it's funny as I'm sitting here kind of pondering the difference, I've noticed that positive rights require somebody to give something up. Like, positive rights are you're asking for something, where negative rights are literally being asked to be left alone, right? You're not really asking the
Right.
government to do anything except like let you live your life. And that seems like
Well,
a
and
key difference.
yeah, and positive rights, I think, require um, some entity to do that compelling or forcing. Like, you're not asking someone directly. Like people who think that I don't know, we'll say I'll use education as an example. People who think that a college degree is a right, they aren't going to the administrative office at the college and saying, "Hey, I believe that you should give this to me for free." They are petitioning the government to force someone else to give them that. And so I think uh, you know whereas negative rights, we're saying, yeah, we want the government to leave us alone, and really their only job is to protect us against anyone infringing on our natural rights. Instead, it's we need someone powerful, a group that's powerful that can force people to give us what we're asking for.
That or like violent uprising, right? Because you're right, you can't do it
Right.
without some kind of force, and whether that's asking the government or whether that's like French Revolution style where people are taking to the
Right.
streets and starting to, guillotine people. It's comes down to force. I think it also comes down to who you believe gives you your rights. And I feel
Mhm.
like people who believe in positive rights believe that it has to be the government, right? That it has to be that entity saying, "Here, let me, dole out all these privileges to you," instead of people who believe in classical liberalism, the real liberalism, or believe in this limited government, and they think that, I say they, I think I'm one of those people, but all you have to do is be born to have rights. It
Right.
doesn't
Mhm.
involve the government. If you believe in limited government, is only to protect those rights from being infringed on by other people. But you don't have
But if
they're
the
not
government
conditional. Oh, go on.
Right, and if you were born in a society where there wasn't a government, I don't know if we'd even call it a society then, but if you were born in a situation where there isn't a government, you would still have all of those rights. Even
Exactly,
in
exactly.
absence of someone to protect them, it would be your job, I suppose, to protect those rights yourself, but you are inherently born with those rights.
That no, that's exactly right. And there's nothing you have to do. And I know people might say, well, like, what about people who live in countries where they don't have those rights? Well, it's the government that's violating those, right? They do have those rights, even if the government that they live under isn't actually respecting those rights. So I think it's really important to get these two right, because a lot of policies we see today are based on positive rights. Like, I think it's California. It sounds like it would be California or like Portland or something. But there's or Oregon, excuse me. There's like a bill up for homelessness right now that's basically saying like everybody, like the government has to provide housing, and that would be like a positive right. And it's funny because that also ignores root causes of things. Homelessness
Mhm.
isn't just because people can't get a home. Sometimes there
Right.
was an experiment, I think it actually was in Utah where I'm from, where they were going to provide housing, and even when they provided housing, people went back on the street because that's not the root
Right.
cause of the problem. So it just positive rights sound good, and utopian is a word that people would call it, which is like everything's perfect and we all take care of each other, but it's really not, because as you said, Katie, it all comes at the expense of somebody else. It comes through force. It comes through somebody having to enforce that. So before we wrap up, just kind of a recap. Positive rights are asking the government or some entity for something like free housing, free healthcare. Negative rights are the kind of rights where you just say, no, you're not allowed to do that, government, because you're only here to protect my free speech. Or, you cannot, or what is it? Government shall not infringe on free speech. They, should not violate right to bear arms. So these are very important distinctions to make. And some fun homework for your family is when you hear about a new law or policy being proposed, ask yourself, is this asking for a negative right or is this a positive right? So we will leave it there and wrap up. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. And until next time, we will talk to you later.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Way the World Works. Make sure your family is subscribed and check out TuttleTwins.com for more awesome content.